Afternoon, Tim. How you doing?
Afternoon, Shabbar. I'm good. I'm very, very, very busy at the moment, but always happy to find time to have a chat and explore money with you.
I know it's always one of the highlights of my week, certainly. And yesterday was Father's Day, so in the UK. Now I don't know when this episode is going out, but we're Monday the 16th of June, and yesterday was Father's Day in the UK. And this got me thinking about a few things, reflecting on my role as a parent, my role as a son, and also how I ended up coming into this work that you do. And it was due to a, should we call it a parental kind of money issue that has sort of dogged me for decades. So I thought, well, look, since it was Father's Day yesterday, I'd probably like to explore money and parents and see where we can go with that, because I know that we've talked about it before in other circles. I just think it's a valuable conversation, and in my work and in my personal life, the issue or the problem of money alongside parents is quite a deep and profound one.
It sounds good, and we've all had parents or people in that role, and definitely our money dances, the way we navigate the problem of money, and the way we do or don't embrace our life path or get tangled up unconsciously with money. Of course, a lot of that is shaped by early early education, socialization, and parental upbringing. So yeah, it'd be great to dive into it. So yeah, over to you. What do you want to say about what you noticed with your upbringing or your parents?
Well, I think it's probably good just to start with a little bit of a background story, which I've alluded to before. And one of the reasons why I became so interested in this work was, growing up, had a very sort of middle class upbringing, lots of nice holidays, dad dressing in nice suits. And I know you're sort of going to pick up on all of these things that I'm saying, and I know there's going to be some sort of follow up afterwards.
Well,
But
I think when you say that, I think you're saying that because probably you're noticing things.
yeah, maybe,
Maybe
maybe.
you're starting to notice patterns or echoes of other conversations we've had.
Yeah, exactly. So I had this sort of image of us being quite, middle class, fairly well off,
Hmm.
private school education. As I said, my dad changing his car every few years and driving nice cars and having a taste for the finer things in life.
Mm.
Reflecting back, no real money conversations. I just saw spending taking place,
Mm.
and it was great. And then we got to an age where I was sort of like 15, 16, and I started to pick up that things weren't going great. And my dad was very successful in his line of work. He used to be a mortgage advisor. And so he was always out meeting clients and doing all of that. And, one particular client I think he got involved with in terms of a project, sort of a business, a startup, and they went down this route, and it ended really badly because the startup, well, now with hindsight, I know that most startups don't succeed, but at that time, I think we all got carried away with this idea of, oh wow, this is going to be the next big thing, and we're going to be really, really rich, and I used to just sort of hear these promises of the rewards of this business venture. It went really bad. My dad got into a lot of debt. It took a real toll, and it spread over like a period of, I would say, about 8 to 10 years of him trying to keep the company alive, borrowing money, pumping
Mm.
money in, remortgaging the house, etc. Envelopes starting to appear, you
Wow.
know, and it was very stressful at home. And it ultimately led with us having our home repossessed. And that was the culmination of, right, that's it, game over. And up until then, it was sort of living in hope that next week or next month or just a bit more money is going to solve it. Okay. And you sort of believe that. But deep down, you're sort of like thinking, Dad, do you really know what you're doing as you get older? And in the beginning, you're
How
caught.
old were you during this 8 year period, 8 to 10 years?
So let's say I started to become aware of him being involved in a project at around the age of 14,
Wow.
15. And at that time it was all exciting, and he would tell me about it. By the time I finished university, I think I was 23, 24, and then we lost the home. So I was grown up at that time, but nevertheless still very traumatic for me to have that. And so that was my sort of observation of my parents and money in a nutshell, in about 3 or 4 minutes.
Mm.
But the impact has been huge, and we've spoken about this in several one-to-one sessions. From that point of 24, 25 onwards, when we lost the family home and everything that sort of culminated in that event, that really shaped the direction of my life in terms of my relationship with money. And yeah, it's something to explore, maybe, and might resonate with a few people that are listening who have gone through similar, maybe not identical, but where there's been a real big financial kind of event
Mm.
that's kind of rocked their world. But also maybe the subtle messages that you pick up along the way. So there's both, and we've talked about this before. So anyway, over to you.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for sharing, because you won't be the only one with some memory around money from their childhood that was, you could say, quite traumatic. Losing your house is a
Mm,
traumatic event. Having that level of stress in your family around money, it's obviously affecting all the relationships. So for me, that would be an example of what I would call money trauma, or a money related trauma. Remember the title of our podcast, The Problem of Money. We're not saying money is a trauma. We're not even saying not having money is a trauma. But when there's lots and lots of anxiety and strong emotion and fear and hope and all of this stuff swimming around, and we don't know what's going on, then money gets wrapped up in traumatic experiences. So that's an example for me of a money trauma. And yeah, you won't be the only person. And I'm sure lots of people listening to this will be looking back and thinking about very kind of specific and highly charged events. And as you say, at the same time, and this would probably be more my shaping with my money and my upbringing, or parents, you've got what I call a chronic pattern, which I mean, it's just more general stuff, right?
yeah.
So I think we're all pretty shaped, and anyone listening to this, if you want to really get into your money dance and your money patterns, then one really good place, not the only place, but one really good place to do what we call detective work, is to look back at your childhood and upbringing around money and start to map out both the chronic patterns, like how it was in general, and we'll talk about those, and for some people, whether there were very highly charged events. I could say I can break it down more and give some other examples from people I've worked with, because this can go in all sorts of ways, the impact these things can have on us. You said that this was one of the things, definitely it's had a big impact, and maybe it's shaped a lot of how you've dealt with money. How would you describe that experience as having shaped your life with money, or your understanding of money?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for me, it sort of follows in two ways that it showed
Mhm.
up. Firstly, in my relationship with my dad and my mum. So it's had an impact on how we relate to each other, and even how you view the other person. And
Mm.
especially with parental figures, it's funny that naturally we build up a certain image. I even used the word my dad in the suits, right? Because that was the image that I had of my dad: successful businessman, professional, nice car, well respected in the community, all of these things. And then suddenly this thing with money happens,
Mm.
and that just gets shattered because
Mm.
of the qualities that he had that I really liked. Now, was I now projecting those onto the money? And I wasn't actually, fully aware. There's no, what I saw in him were, the really good qualities of, great dad, very smart looking, good with people, all of these sorts of things. But superficially, there was some sort of, oh yeah, this is to do with money. So there was the relationship thing. And then I think with my mum, it's a case of like the lack of ownership, that, you know, she didn't have any say in money as such. You know, I think you could call typical Asian sort of family dynamic where dad
Mm.
takes care of the money, mum takes care of the home.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a fallout in terms of just the relationship. So that's
Mm-hmm.
one.
Mm-hmm.
And then second, it's just like how now my behavior
Mm.
changed, and a lot of my conflicts and tensions around money started to appear because of the narrative that was going on in my head, which was, look what happened when dad tried to go for something big and chase
Mm.
money. He got burnt. Alarm bells are ringing. Stay safe, stay within those boundaries that we talked about, I think back in episode 3 or 4, which
Mm.
was you don't grab money, you don't push it away, but you stay within a safe boundary. And I
Mm-hmm.
created myself a safe boundary which aligned with community, standing, all of those sorts of things, and it just keeps you stuck in a place. So I think that's, you know, that's where it showed up for me the most.
Like an almost a fear or a refusal to take risks, because at a very important time in your development from a young man into a grown up, what you perceived, because of course there'll be lots of different stories about what happened to your dad and the choices made, but it sounds like in your version of it, what you perceived was someone really going for it, trying to go big, get lots of money, take a risk, and it didn't work. So that would be an example in my framework of a traumatic event, and you choosing consciously or otherwise to, I will never do that.
Yeah.
Right.
And just a couple at that point, I think after the money traumatic event, I sort of turned more inwards to spirituality and focused more on my religion,
Mm.
feeling that, you know, the godly path, the abstention from worldly things was a better route for me. And that could well be the case, but I think it was not consciously done, it was
Mm.
unconscious.
Mm.
And again, then that brings a different dynamic around sort of religion and money, and then it all gets a little bit confusing as to how do I show up with all of this stuff. So
Well, we can break it down. And just to be clear for those listening, we're not planning this episode to be a deep dive with you,
yeah,
Shabbar. Good, and maybe another time. We're using what you're sharing, and thank you again for sharing it, to encourage everyone listening to start reviewing their own upbringing, parental influences with money. So maybe if I drop in another couple of examples, would that be helpful to
go
give
for it.
examples of how these patterns? In terms of the framework, then, there's what I would call big money, big emotionally charged money events. You could say traumatic, but actually, I've got an example of one that wasn't traumatic, but it was still very highly charged. So you've got specific things. The bailiffs came, we lost our house, or this happened, or there was this huge row because of this, or a conflict, or we suddenly made loads of money and it was the most amazing thing and our life transformed. So people listening, there can be big things. And as I say, there can be more underlying things. Now, what I've noticed in working with lots and lots of people over this is when there's a big thing, if it grabs our own emotionality, people go one of two ways. One is they're loyal to it. I will do that. I will follow that. It's not conscious. So an example of that is I had someone come on my workshop once who had a real gambling problem, And they'd been keeping it secret. They were in a long-term relationship with children, and they'd been keeping it secret. And it had recently come to light, their gambling debt. So you can imagine that's really painful stuff. And actually, the two partners, the man and woman, were also on the workshop together. So it was really powerful. When we explored with this person, he described his dad had been a gambler. Now, again, maybe scientifically there's some hereditary thing. I've
Mm.
no idea. But when I asked him what he remembered, he didn't remember the pain of the gambling. He didn't remember the problems or the bailiffs. I don't know if the bailiffs even came. His memory was of being quite young, and when his dad won, of the excitement and energy and euphoria in the house. And he remembered literally being in bed and dad coming and shoving notes under the door.
Wow.
So the point is, I don't know that story, and I'm not imagining the gambling ended particularly well for his dad, although I don't know. It certainly hadn't ended well for him. The point is, there was a very strong, highly charged impression. And
Mm,
that's when he saw his dad alive, excited,
mm,
fun, and maybe even sort of really connecting with his son in a particular way. And something in that had led him to develop this gambling habit. Or
mm.
I don't want to make it causal. I'm not saying that event had
Yeah,
done it. But the point is, unconsciously, even though he could see this isn't working, I'm losing money, I'm lying to my family, this is terrible, there was some old pattern that he was repeating that he was loyal to. So that's one example of loyalty. Yours is an example of the opposite, and I've got another example. So what you're saying is, well, that was a very highly charged event or period of time. And your story, as I said, is my dad took a risk. He tried to make it big. It ended badly. Therefore, I will never do that. I will do the opposite.
yeah. Interesting. So, just in terms of the rebellion, I actually remember the day that we had to leave because the bailiffs were coming.
Mm,
I remember sitting on the kitchen table,
mm,
and I don't remember a lot from that day, but I just remember the words I uttered. And I was really upset, and my neighbor had come round, and I just said, I'm never going to be attached to anything material again
right.
because of the house, right? That was like for me oh my
Yeah.
God, like,
Yeah.
and that was my stake in the ground of, right, I'm rebelling against money, and I don't want anything to do with it because I don't want to get attached to money and materials.
So there were two little rebellions, both connected, but they're not the same, and they'll both be
Okay.
affected. One was because now you do material things.
Yeah,
You like
yeah.
golf and golf equipment, holidays, and you like nice stuff. And one is you say, "I will never take big risks."
Yeah.
Right. So that was the risk my dad took, went bad. I will never do that. And the other was, I'm hearing so painful to lose all of these lovely material things. I will never be attached to them. Both will limit one's life, right? If
Mm,
I can never take risks because something painful happened
mm,
10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, that limits my life path. And the other thing is maybe stepping into your spiritual focus. And that's a wonderful thing. And I have a spiritual focus. But watch out, because if the real reason I'm stepping into spirituality is because I think I will avoid the pain that happened, or I will avoid the upset or the disappointment. In my view, that's not real spirituality. Real spirituality is going to open you up more to life. But when we're young, we make these things. Let me give one more example of an unconscious kind of rebellion or
mm,
disloyalty, and then we'll see where the conversation
mm,
goes. And I'll give one example, but this pattern has come up a few times. It's not common, but I would say maybe 2 or 3 times I've had this on a workshop. I'm thinking of one person in particular, great person. They worked as a psychotherapist, but their life just felt very colorless. Their work was okay. Their money was okay. It wasn't great, but it was okay. But they just had a lack of vitality, lack of color, lack of enjoyment of life. And the way they presented was all in the way some psychotherapists do, not all, but it was all a bit serious and earnest and contained. And when we explored, eventually we realized that their dad had been this incredibly colorful character. They'd been brought up outside of the UK. And they gradually realized, a bit like your dad, it took you a few years to figure it out. Their dad was quite dodgy. I'm not saying that was your dad, by
mm.
the way. He made it, but their dad was dodgy. He was right on the edge of the law. He was quite possibly involved in criminal activities. They had to leave where they were living in a rush and arrive somewhere. And again, it was all very unclear. And at various points, the authority were after dad. And she never quite knew exactly what he'd done. But here was the interesting thing. She realized that as she grew up, actually, dad is doing illegal stuff and it creates chaos and it creates
Mm.
disruption. So again, she made the loyal thing. I will never do that. Not conscious, but I am never going to do that. Unfortunately, her dad was also this incredibly charismatic, colorful, life filled guy. And years later, when her dad had passed away and she talked to people about her dad, they would say things like, oh, he was dodgy, but he was we loved your dad. He was so much fun to be around, right? So psychologically, those things get enmeshed. How he got his money was illegal and she didn't want to have anything to do with that. But all of that fun and vitality and joy and kind of creative chaos, she also had pushed away. And so as a result, her life was, yes, very legal and very stable, but really lacking joy. And what she needed to do is find the part of her that was like her dad and honor it, even though it had caused pain, in order to let the vitality back in her life. She had to realize she'd been unconsciously rebellious and find a way to honor the thing that she said, I would never do that. And then her life could be more fun.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, it almost feels like we throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing. That's the analogy. In all of these situations, we just discard all of it without realizing that, like, the money thing was separate from how that person was. We just don't differentiate, do we? And that causes it a lot of problems. And it's easier to spot in these like big events that take place.
Yeah.
Mine, in this sort of situation where they probably were on the run kind of thing, like a bit of a, up and leave. And you watch these documentaries about these sort of criminal gangs. And I was watching one the other day around like trying to steal the diamond from the O2, the Millennium Dome and stuff. And they go back and they're sort of the same thing. They're like the character who now must be in his 50s, obviously served time. He was such a lively, bubbly character, and they interviewed one of his kids, and again, she was like growing up, I knew something wasn't quite right, but everyone would just say, "Oh yeah, you're so and so's daughter." Like, oh, it's such a great laugh, so like all of that sort of stuff. And it must be really difficult. I know it has been for me, to try and separate these, the money stuff and the person.
Well, let me say something on that. It's a really important point. You're right. We throw the baby out with the bathwater. In terms of the problem of money and Peter Koenig's process that we're unpacking in all of these podcasts, we entangle the idea of money with strong emotions. So in this case, the way this person's father got money was dodgy. We reject it. We say it's painful, but then everything else that's part of that we also reject. It all gets kind of tangled up, and a bit like that. In some cultures, maybe in America, or maybe some other personality, Shabba, with your dad, maybe they would have taken a totally different meaning from what happened. They would have said, well, it's great, you've got to try businesses, and in America, when they're more entrepreneurial, you're not a proper entrepreneur till you've failed one business, till you've gone bankrupt.
I was going to say, losing the home might be a badge of honor in a way, right? Look what I put on the line, and it all went, and then I went again, and then I did it.
And some people, and I say this not with criticism, but just to encourage anyone listening, the stories we tell about what happened with these big events are really about our psychology. They're not the truth. So I'm sure it was stressful and full of tension and very difficult. That's a real experience. But the story you tell, some people would come out of that and say, I am going to play safe. I will never take big risks and go for big things. I will never be attached to material things. Someone else living next door having the same experience could say, I am going to work harder than my dad and make sure I become a millionaire by the time I'm 30. And they'd be driven. And one's not better than the other, but the story you tell about what happened is your story, and that's really your psychology.
And also the limiting belief that you place on yourself as a result. So I think in my situation, it was a case of, okay, this happened, therefore I not only rebelling, but psychologically, because my dad didn't succeed, I'm just like him. It becomes almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because you've put yourself in the rebellious phase, and then you're saying, well, I can't possibly, be successful and take on an entrepreneurial journey, because that's just not, who I am. And look, my dad didn't do it, and I'm his son, and therefore it's just not in my genes.
Here's where it gets very interesting, and I'll say this, and then let's decide whether we want to talk about the other pattern,
Yeah.
more low level, or whether that's another pod. I'm not sure. Okay, how can I put this? Yeah, for you, one of your stories was, well, entrepreneurialism isn't for me. My dad tried, he failed. I'm my dad's son. Or just like this other woman said, well, that sort of colorful, charismatic, risky life, that's not for me. So you can go, that is, I'm just like my dad, or I'm totally different from my dad. Remember, someone else could have the same experience of either of you and reach a totally different conclusion. Okay. So why would one person follow their parents' story and another definitely go against it? One possibility, and this is a bit of psychology here, kind of arising from the work of Jung and people who've come after him, is none of it was caused by what happened. So maybe all of us have a life journey we're here to go through. Maybe all of us have characteristics we need to grow and learn more about, and we have blind spots or shadow sides. So maybe in your soul, you Shabbat, for whatever reason, you're here to learn partly how to integrate the spiritual and the material.
Mm.
And maybe you're here to learn how to overcome fear and take big risks. I'm not saying that you are, but maybe there's some path or something you have to explore in your adult life. Well, then because of that, the meaning you took from what happened to your dad is play safe, and now, whatever, 20 years later or 30 years later, you're realizing, no, there's something beyond that. Okay. Now, there's some quite complex psychology there. What I'm saying really is we're shaped by what happened with our parents' money, but that doesn't necessarily cause what's happened. What really causes it might be underlying ways we're already seeing the world, or underlying blind spots we already have, and they get tangled up with the story. And that's why you decided not to take risks, and the person living next door, if they'd had the same experience, would decide to take loads of risks and be a millionaire.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does that sound? Maybe
Yeah,
that's
it makes total sense, and this is where I think we've said part of this detective work that we do is checking out whether is it actually real. We talk about is this actually reality? Is my thinking correct around these issues? And when you take the time and you look at the counter, and the counter examples are always the ones that, for me especially, really light up. And when you see that actually, well, no, this isn't the hard and fast rule in this particular situation. And I'm just thinking about the example that you gave, and the person that made a lot of money illegally, and he was vibrant and bubbly and this, that, the other, and you couple the two together, there could be someone who makes money illegally and is an absolute miserable git.
totally
Right.
So there could be lots of people who have very safe, stable jobs and obey the law, who are full of colour and
Yeah,
life vitality.
exactly. But we kind of stereotype that the fun loving criminal kind of thing, that's the way it is, because and it's very dangerous. So for me, yeah, it makes perfect sense, and the counter examples are where I like to sort of go, and then I get those ahas that it's not actually the way I'm seeing it. It's not actually the way. But yeah, I'm happy with that, and I'd kind of like to sort of move towards the more underlying sort of what would we call it? The hum in the background, like the buzzing in the background. It's always there, and that shapes us. Do you want to say some stuff around that?
Let me say a bit, and then we may not get into all of it today, and we can carry on in another podcast and also talk about children, like if you're a parent. I call that the chronic pattern, right? If you have a chronic illness, it's there, and it's always there, but it's not necessarily so important that you notice it the whole time or causing loads of problems. I think that's more common. Plenty of people have a traumatic, highly charged event, but most of us, if we don't have that, it's just like the atmosphere. So again, it's like, well, what was the atmosphere around money? What were the conversations about money? Were there any? What were all the little subtle value judgments and what was approved of and what was disapproved? And what were the assumptions? And most of that just exists in this slightly foggy atmosphere. And the point is, it doesn't need to be a traumatic event. We just absorb it. We just absorb it. So I'll give an example. That was more my upbringing. So we grew up, my dad actually, when he first had kids, wasn't particularly well off, but he had a good job in a bank and gradually he made more money. So we were comfortable and then he became relatively wealthy. I think without anyone talking about it much, I just absorbed a whole load of stuff. And as I say, this might be about my psychology or what I'm here to learn. I'm not saying my dad caused it or created it, but I absorbed just the story that what a man does if you're a big man, because of course, when you're a child, your dad's a big man, right? That men earn money and they need to be able to earn quite a lot of money. And therefore, a successful man is someone who earns quite a lot of money. I mean, simply put. And my dad followed quite a conventional life. And then when I left university, and my nature, I'm not that conventional. I'm quite radical, quite political, quite environmental. So I didn't want to go off and join a graduate training program or get a proper, that wasn't my path. But for a long time, I felt very conflicted and I didn't understand why. I still followed my path and I was exploring and doing music and activism and this and that, but I wasn't earning much money and I was feeling really shitty about myself. And I was really caught between following my path, which is actually real success. Real success is you follow your path with and without money. But I felt somehow weak and not a real man and not successful and all of this stuff. And it was only through Peter's work, really, Peter Koenig's work and exploring it, I had to decouple the idea that what a grown-up, strong, successful man is not defined by money. Now, I would have intellectually said I already knew that, but I had to go deeper and really see the extent to which kind of in my body, in my physiology, I still had this sense that because I wasn't earning a certain amount, it made me a failure and a weak man. And it doesn't make any sense intellectually, and you can often spot it, but I had to do the work and really, really get that sense that in the terms of what we're saying on this podcast, none of these qualities in the money. If you're powerful with money and without money. If you're successful because you're really following or creating whatever it is you're trying to do in life. Sometimes it has money, sometimes it doesn't. But I had to learn that. I can think of other examples, but that's one example. It was an atmosphere. My dad was a lovely guy and actually not very materialistic and quite chilled. He never said to me, "Oh, son, to be a man, you've got to earn." He never said that. It's just I absorbed it really, or I made that story up.
Yeah, which we do. I remember I don't know whether it was in another podcast or you were just saying about how your dad just drove a very, what car did he drive? I can't remember what it was.
A Mini before Minis became cool.
Before they became cool, and he would pull up to the bank and in his car parking spot, and that was him. So yeah, it's funny how we just latch on to these things and then we make them truths, and decoupling from that is massive. And just in that, there's a whole conversation around men, money, success, and especially in community settings where we've associated money with being a successful man, and it's almost like the dance or the masks that we all have to then wear. One day, I'm going to note this down. It's like, so what's the downside of wearing the mask all the time? Because
it's a great question.
Yeah, so I'd like to go there, but another time. But this just highlighted. And so, what was the sort of the process for you to decouple?
I think that's using Peter's work and this step. We talk a lot on the podcast about detective work, and we've sometimes said and sometimes done it with you. The next step is what we call reclamation work. So from first, we don't see this stuff at all, right? We're just driven, or we're feeling shitty, or we can't do this, or we can do that. Then we get curious and we do the detective work. We go, oh, well, I'm following this pattern, or I've made this story up, or maybe it's not. So looking for counterexamples is an example of detective work. All of this stuff, it starts to change the way we think. And then the final step, which you can do if anyone wants to, they can come on one of my workshops. Maybe we'll look into this more. There are some YouTube with Peter doing some of this work, but it's a very specific series of steps where you kind of unlock something in your body or physiology. It's a little
Mm.
hard to talk about, so we'd either have to do it.
Or you could go back to episode 6 where we
Right.
did the sweaters and the socks. I think that was, we dived into some reclamation work there, so
Yeah.
you can see how it sort of pans out
Yeah.
in a very sort of limited in a
Yeah.
limited way.
I'd be happy maybe next podcast to go into what I did and the phrase I said
Yeah.
for sure. I'm wondering, I'm aware of our time. Would it be helpful to briefly give just one more example of this chronic pattern, this general atmosphere?
Yeah, you give an example, and then I'll give one, maybe just a quick one from my retirement planning clients that I see quite a lot, which I think's quite common. But yeah, let's give a
Well, why
couple
don't
more.
you
Yeah,
give
so
your
one that I see with a lot of my clients as they get older is this: now they've reached this stage where they've got enough money to take care of themselves and really live a very rich life and do the things that they want to do, and that's great. But there's a hesitation and there's a reluctance to do it. And even when you can show them the modeling and all of the stuff that says, look, even if you spent twice as much as you're spending now, you're not going to run out of money. You're going to be financially okay. And there's this hesitation, and it's like, but we've just grown up from an early age where we didn't have a lot of money. Things were tight. Dad worked in the factory. I'm thinking of a Scottish lady who, her dad would go to the factory and come back really hard working. Money was always tight. They were very careful, consciously spending, or not spending, however you want to frame it. That just got ingrained, that you don't buy things that you don't actually
Mm,
need.
mm,
And so it's really hard for them later
mm.
on in life, when they do have, the resources to do the
Yeah,
things, and they're almost like suppressing it because
yeah,
of this just way of life that they became accustomed to. I see
yeah.
that a lot.
Yeah, it's very common. It can sometimes be religious. Don't be frivolous. Don't spend money on yourself, or just save money, or just there isn't money, or just an atmosphere of anxiety about money running out. So that even if you show someone the spreadsheet, their money won't run out. They're still very caught up in the family atmosphere. So they can be very strong messengers. Doing a job you hate for the money is a very strong atmosphere. If you grew up and maybe your family, you had money, you were okay, but the price your parents paid for it was a low level depression or didn't enjoy it, there's just a very powerful story. That's what you have to do. You have to sacrifice your life, or you have to sacrifice doing what you really want. Many people repeat parent stories of maybe mum or dad wanted to go off and do, I don't know, be an artist or travel
Mm.
the world or something. But they made the quotes sensible decision. And then they did something that was all right, but we had money. And what you absorb is a very strong message that you can't really do what you want to do in life. You have to sacrifice. So they're very strong family messages, and sometimes, as I say, religious or cultural messages. Um, I give one other example, and then we'll close off. Someone else I worked with was a little bit the opposite. Grew up in a working class family, didn't have much money, but then dad started to do all right and started to have more money, but never loads. But they were doing all right. But one of their family, I think it was one of their family friends, when they lost their job, they, I think, started a business, maybe the opposite of your dad, and they made lots of money. So it was a kind of working class background. Dad did okay, but someone else made lots of money through going into business. And there was just this sort of subtle unease in the family around the table about the person who'd made lots of money, and a subtle kind of deprecation of it, like it was a bit, it's not what we do, not what people like us do, or a bit. I don't know, gauche, is that the right word? The point is, there was a subtle disapproval of people who go out and make loads of
Mm,
money. And this person in their own life kind of has the possibility to do things that could make a lot more money and finds it very hard. There's a sort of a loyalty, not to a traumatic event, but a loyalty to some story that folk like us don't make money.
mm,
Or even it's a bit not very good to go and make lots of money. So again, that can be a very subtle atmosphere. But
mm,
then if you're in your adult life and you've got an opportunity to go forward, or you want to really develop some area of work or some possibility, you might find yourself just not doing it. And it's nothing to do with the reality or the business plan. It's you're caught by some story from round the dinner table 30 years ago. So anyone listening, yeah, I would encourage maybe ask these questions. What from my family upbringing am I either being loyal to, I'm following it, or what am I rebelling against? And that could be a very strong, very exhilarating or traumatic event, or it could be a real low grade atmosphere. But I think it's great work to
mm.
investigate that and see.
And what would be sort of, I know we're not going to sort of reclamation, but if someone starts to notice, okay, look, this is an area that I'm being loyal to, or this is where I'm sort of rebelling. Once they've sort of maybe noticed that,
Mm.
I know we always talk about looking at counter examples,
Mm.
etc. But in this sort of situation where I think it's quite chronic and
Mm.
very difficult to break
Mm.
free, is the only way the sort of the deep reclamation work, or are there sort of little wins that maybe people listening can take just to sort
Yeah.
of distance themselves, even momentarily? Right, you might slip back
Yeah.
into the chronic.
Yeah, it's a great question. Great question. So if you're doing this and you notice some story, I would just reflect on the following questions. First of all, as far as you can, write out the belief or the story. Just write it out on a piece of paper. I believe that to be a big successful man, I need to earn lots of money. Or I believe it would somehow be wrong to earn lots of money. Write it, because as soon as it's out and it's on a piece of paper, you've already got some space, and it's much easier then to see, oh, that's not definitely true. So write out your belief. No judgment or shame, just write them out. Then you can do a few things. One question is to ask yourself, how does believing this serve my life, right? And where doesn't it? Because that's what I'm implying. Usually, any of these fixed beliefs, they don't really help us. So how does this belief limit my life? Or does it serve my life? And be very honest where it keeps you stuck. And then the final thing, and really look, you could look at, if you're our age, you could look over decades and say, my goodness, how's it really affecting my life, thinking that I can never take a risk, right? You'll see something, and there might be some feeling of regret or sadness or something. And then the final thing, well, actually, not quite final. Um, then you just look at it and go, is it definitely true? Is it definitely true? And that's where you can find counter examples. Maybe the guy next door, something like that happened, it's completely different. And then the final thing people could do is just start to imagine, what decisions would I make differently in my life and work if I believed the opposite? So there's quite a lot of steps there.
Yeah.
But if someone worked with all of those questions and their family background with money, I think they would definitely see something. And I'd love people listening to let us know, email us, write in the comments, because it's really great to hear from people about if they're using these things and the insights they get.
Yeah, I think that would be lovely if anyone does do the exercise or has any sort of ahas, or even a topic that they would like us to discuss. I think reaching out to us on LinkedIn, which our LinkedIn handles are in the show notes. So reach out to Tim or myself. Should we wrap it up for today?
Yeah, sounds good. And maybe next time we talk about children.
Yeah, when the child becomes the parent, and
Yeah.
how does that evolve? Look forward to it, Tim.
Happy Father's Day, Shabbar.
Cheers. You too.